Welcome back to the Star Wars Universe Podcast. Today we're talking about The Mandalorian, Season 1, Episode 4, Sanctuary. Will the Mandalorian and the child ever be able to find a safe place to be? Can they help take down an ATST against evil raiders fighting alongside villages? And is Cara Dune the most bae person in Star Wars? Coming up soon. So I'm Matthew S. Fox.
And I am Jeff Randall.
Jeff, how are we doing today?
Doing fantastic, sir. This is one of my favorite episodes in the series. I mean, there's only 8, but this one is the best because
what do you like so much about it?
It introduced Cara Dune. Cara Dune is bae.
There you go.
Cara Bae is her new name.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a lot that I love here. I love her character. I've loved this actress ever since she played Angel Dust on Deadpool. I know she's been in a number of other things. And I loved getting to see, we talk a lot about how this show is all about, the people in the trenches, not the top people. And to have just like a random trooper who was part of the war, not one of the generals, not one of the people leading the attacks, but this is one of the people who we just see them for 2 seconds as they get, mown down on Hoth or Endor. And now really get to hear the story of how someone got to fight for their, the rebellion and what happens to them afterwards. That this is the kind of like deep storytelling that I love. Yeah,
this is really fleshing out the world. And honestly, this episode, if you look at the grand scheme of it, like didn't really drive the overall story forward at all. It was just, it was fun little pulp, got some flavor to the universe and was just a fun little side thing, little side story.
Yeah, this is, and I think we've talked about this a bit. I would like it if more shows, especially these kind of things, had episodes like this. Because to me, this is kind of the day in the life of a bounty hunter mercenary. It reminded me a lot of shows like Burn Notice, or Burn Notice is probably my favorite example, but also even like older shows like the A-Team and stuff like that, where it's about a hero and there's always sort of, the client of the week.
Yeah.
And with something like Burn Notice, maybe there's like a larger ongoing story as well. But it's also really just that, here's the weak, here's the bad person, here's the innocent people the bad people are trying to fight. Here's the person who is cute and looks like they need help, and one of our heroes is probably going to flirt with them, and then we'll have a big battle at the end, and then I'll say goodnight.
Yep. And honestly, like you say, here's our person who's cute, and our hero, one of our heroes is probably going to flirt with them. But we didn't really get a lot of that here. Like we got a lot of, the struggle with should I take the helmet off in this one.
Right.
And I love that. I love that like other people want him to take the helmet off and just like, you can just live here, man. You can just give it up. You can just, you can just be. And he's like, no, this is the way.
Yeah. It's that opportunity for him to really kind of see like, until now, we've only seen him like in the bounty hunter world and in the Mandalorian world. And this episode, we get to see like what happens when he steps out of that.
Yep.
For those who are following along at home, I realize we should have done this maybe at the beginning, but let's just do a quick summary of the episode. And rather than ask myself or Jeff to, I've been putting Jeff on the spot to read those, but today I just grabbed one from Wikipedia. Arriving on the sparsely populated forest planet Sorgan, the Mandalorian encounters ex-rebel trooper turned mercenary Cara Dune. Following a short brawl, Dune explains that she's hiding after taking early retirement and asks the Mandalorian to leave. While he prepares his ship, 2 desperate fishermen approach, offering to hire him to drive off a band of Kaltunian raiders. He accepts the job in exchange for lodging, using their credits to enlist Dune's help. At the village, they are hosted by Omera, a widowed mother. The Mandalorian confides in her that no one has seen him without his helmet since childhood, when his tribe took him in as one of themselves. They provoke the raiders at night, with Dune luring the ATST into a trap for the Mandalorian to blow up and forcing the remaining raiders to flee. With peace restored, the Mandalorian plans to leave the child in the village, but a guild bounty hunter tracks it down and is killed by Dune. Realizing that neither the village nor the child would be safe, the Mandalorian departs with the child. So yeah, it's a lot of things happening, and it kind of gives you a better glimpse of what's happening in the world. But the story itself is very self-contained.
Yeah, like you could potentially take this one out and not have anything be affected by its loss. I'm going to say loss because it would be a huge hole in my heart.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't lose anything because at the beginning they're on the run and at the end they're on the run, and everything that happened on Sorgan was contained on Sorgan. Like what happens in Sorgan stays in Sorgan. Am I right?
No, it's true. And I feel like I mentioned it before, but have you seen the TV show Burn Notice?
I have not.
Burn Notice is, I mean, it's a spy show. It's not genre in this kind of genre at all, although it's a very good one. But it is my perfect example of how to mix story of the week with overarching story.
Yep.
Because generally what happens is the hero is working on some big mystery that's the story of the whole season. But he's got to pay the bills, and somewhere along the way, he takes on a client and has to deal with a spy case, of the week.
Right.
And it always does a great job of letting there be moments along the way that show you either more about his character or more about his world, or most often more about the overall overarching story he's dealing with, while also having a very compelling story of the week. And this episode to me is just the perfect mix of that. Because you're right, it's totally self-contained. We don't need it for the larger story, but we learn a lot about the Mandalorian. We learn more about, like I said, like ex-rebel troopers, what's happening in the world. We learn about we get some really nice character moments of the Mandalorian having to deal with, like, does he want to step away from the way? Does he want to be a normal person? I agree with you. I think this is possibly my favorite episode in the show.
Yeah, yeah. And when we're meeting Cara Dune for the first time, she immediately establishes herself as a badass. She takes on the Mandalorian straight up bare fist punching his helmet, which is a bad idea. They don't do that in hockey. Come on, man. They don't do that with their gloves in hockey. And she's just like straight up punching his face and knocking him, like hitting him pretty hard. Like she's doing some damage to him. And, it ends with them pointing their guns at each other just all of a sudden. And I love that she shows up like that and doesn't have to like do something in front of him, against, like, she's not having to fight off people in the bar or whatever. It's him.
Yeah.
Like, they straight up throw down. Because we already know that our Mandalorian, our hero here, our protagonist, is a bit of a badass. We've seen him before. Like, he takes on some big stuff, but then she's able to just throw him around.
Yeah. It's interesting because I also think of this, and almost always this would be a bad thing, but today it's not. I kind of think of this as cliche the episode, because there are just so many cliches in this episode. Mm-hmm. Like one of them being like the two heroes have a fight and then realize they want to be friends.
Yep.
But they all work, and they all kind of remember, like, why is this? These are good cliches. I definitely kind of rolled my eyes a bit when that fight started, but then really liked where it ended up. And then in terms of other cliches, like, I mean, this whole story is like the classic traditional Western. We've had a lot of other things that are evocative of the Western motif, but this episode especially, our hero's in town, he doesn't really want to stay, he meets an old friend, and like on his way out of town, he gets reminded that there's some terrible things going on, and so he reluctantly agrees to help. He then finds out that they didn't tell him the whole story and things are much worse than they are.
Yeah.
And he groans and says we should all leave. But, they say no, we should stay and fight. So he stays and fights and it all turns out okay. I mean, this was an exact Firefly episode. John Wayne has made this movie at least twice. Clint Eastwood at least once. Like, it is such a cliche, but such a good one, and they do it so well.
Yep. It's okay to have the cliche type episodes if it's executed well. Like, if it makes us care about our character more, if it brings in, like, if it fleshes out the world in a way that we enjoy. Like, it was a good idea to do a cliche episode like this because they executed it well.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good point. So let's talk about some of the individual characters one at a time. So Cara Dune, obviously, we are a big, big fan of this character. What's your thoughts on her character and how she's introduced?
I really like when, like I said, when they introduce her and she has the fight. she gets into the fight with the Mandalorian. But after that, when they're talking about it and she's telling her story, it's really cool to see that, she was a shock trooper. She was mopping up the Empire, resistance, wherever. And then instead of fighting now that everything's done, quote unquote, we beat the Emperor. She was on like bodyguard missions and protecting politicians. And she's like, that's not what I signed up for. So I'm out. And it wasn't like a, let me get my papers and get out of here. It was like, I'm just leaving. And she's worried that people are going to have a fob on her.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminded me a lot of some of the things I liked most about Rogue One in terms of, you've seen that movie, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, that movie does a great job of showing like, one of my absolute favorite moments is when one of our main characters, like, clearly he's on the side of the Alliance. He's doing what he can. He realizes that he and the person who's helping him might be about to get caught, and he shoots the guy who's helping him. And, like, you realize he's doing it so he doesn't get caught, and, like, the rebellion is better off if he does it. But it's a pretty morally gray moment. And it's a moment of, like, just because the fact that you're on the side of, like, good doesn't mean all of your people are, like, happy just marching into the line of fire. And that's how I felt about this. Like, Cara Dune, she was just such an interesting character. She hates the Empire, but she doesn't love, like, you move from a rebellion to a republic. That's a pretty big shift. And I could see a lot of people being like, nah, I'm going to peace out. I don't want to be part of this.
Yeah. Like, I did the fighting and, you needed that. And maybe I needed that. And I'm not really great at politics, so let me take a step back. That's kind of what I saw her doing. And, there's bound to be other people like that. Like, obviously, that's a thing that happens in the real world. So, leaving out that sort of mentality or that sort of outlook on things does a disservice to the world or to the universe that is being built. And, I'm really glad that they put that here. And I'm really glad it came with such a great character.
Yeah.
Great looking, whatever. Cara Dune is better.
There's many reasons why I love that character for sure. But I definitely agree with you on that. And I also think it also gives us, in the kind of show don't tell idea, like instead of, blue text going across the screen saying, in the years after the defeat of the Empire, the Republic has struggled to maintain its authority and appears to many as, yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, I'll admit I love that exposition, but still, like, she's just explaining her own character, but in so doing, what she's doing also is telling us, like, yeah, the New Republic isn't perfect. It's having a lot of dumb bureaucracy the way governments do. Like, I felt like this episode teaches me so much about, like, what's happening in Coruscant after because to be honest, like, someone signed up for your rebellion and now doesn't want to be a part of it, and you're trying to track them down possibly with bounty hunters, like that's rude. Not a really cool side of the rebellion, Yeah, exactly. How rude.
How dare you? I helped.
Yeah, exactly. I do also like, and I'm going to use this to kind of transition to the when I mentioned the cute person, the fact that that's Omera, it's not Cara Dune. One of the cliches that I think is not a great one is you introduce a female character who's also a good fighter, and so our hero has to fall in love with him.
Yeah.
And I kind of love that, like, yes, there's clearly a possible flirtation between Omera and the Mandalorian. I think much more on her side. But I like that it's introduced in a way that's clearly, like, not all men, like, men and women can be friends and colleagues and have no interest in each other.
Yeah. And
here's a person that he is interested in, but it's very clearly not Cara Dune or vice versa.
Yes.
What was your kind of take on that?
I love that we get both of those, actually. We get he has to think about it with the farmer lady, and she's saying, I'll take care of the kid, or she's got her own kid, she's saying you could stay here. And then Cara Dune, on the other hand, who, like, I immediately shipped him. Like, yeah. I'm not gonna lie, I immediately shipped that. But they're just like, they're bros right after the fight. Like, they duke it out and they're like, all right, I get you. And they fist bump, and then they get back to being bros. So like we get that both of those dynamics in the same episode, and it's kind of the I don't want to say like the two sides of the same coin sort of thing, but like we get a difference in relationships, and it doesn't really like explore it in a deep way, but it gets presented.
Yeah.
And I love that. I love that it got represented, and I love that Cara Dune was such a freaking bro about him wanting to leave. She's like, "You could stay here with that fine piece of lady right there."
Yeah.
And you're not? And what? All you got to do is take the helmet off, and you can't put it back? Like, dude, what are you doing?
Yeah, no, I really love it, and I feel like it's a nice. I mean, it's funny you keep using the term bro, and I think it's very appropriate because that's the way we think about that relationship.
Yeah.
But it's also sort of showing like that relationship doesn't have to be gendered. It doesn't have to be two guys treating like each other. Like a woman and a guy and a man can have that kind of a friendship. That's just a friendship.
Yep.
And I think it was very intentional of the writers to introduce. The show has been pretty light on women characters. Now that I think of it, there was the Mandalorian like craft woman who makes the armorer.
Yeah.
Is that the only woman character we've been introduced to?
In a lasting way? Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Well, that's a negative for the show and a negative for us for not really realizing that until now. Oops.
Sorry.
But the fact that because I feel like it would have been significantly worse to have the only woman who shows her face on the show be a romantic interest.
Yeah.
And so to introduce both of them at the same time, I really like.
Yep.
What's your kind of? We've alluded at it, but like, let's get more into like what's your take on on Omara and like where her and the Mandalorian could have gone and what he chooses to do.
You know what? I don't even want to talk about that. Where did she learn to shoot?
Okay, that's a question.
Like that? I mean, everybody else there is just a farmer, and obviously like has problems remembering which end of the stick is pointy. I guess.
Uh-huh.
I mean, there was that one where it's like, Cara had to flip it for him and be like, "Come on, man, it's a spear. You stab with it. Come now." But they were all farmers, and they had to go through a training montage to get anything done. And after one day of training, everything's fine. But that's a negative against montages, in my opinion, but that's beside the point. Everybody else was kind of incompetent when it came to combat in any way, but then she could shoot. And when they asked everybody who here knows how to shoot, and she raises her hand, I'm like, okay, well, where's that backstory? Come on now.
Yeah, and I wonder if that's something that wound up on the cutting room floor, because I could easily see it as maybe just like because she's on the farm a lot and there's like animals and stuff, but I mean, she could be a former soldier.
Yeah.
I
mean, maybe she bullseyed womp rats back home, but
yeah, we don't know. It's definitely a bit of, an interesting bit of story that I would have liked to explore it a little more. I will say, I didn't know much about the Mandalorians before I started the show, but I have some good friends who've been helping me a lot, who really know the lore from the stories quite well. And remembering also a lot of it from the TV show, the Clone Wars, as well as now reading some books about that time. And I realized that this whole idea of in a lot of ways, this has been fairly true to a lot of the mythology about the Mandalorians up to this point. But the idea that a Mandalorian doesn't take off his helmet is, at least as far as I understand it, I'm sure we'll get some angry emails if not, but is something I think the show came up with. What do you have much of that knowledge, or you kind of as
don't have any knowledge of that?
So what's your kind of take on I've said that phrase a few times now, but yeah, like I found it like a very interesting part of the character, but at first I was like, well, they must have done that because of the TV, because of the lore. When I found out it's not really as big a part of the lore, it made me even more interested. Like, why did they make that choice?
Yeah, it's a hell of a question. Why did they have to hide their face, and who came up with it? It's not one that I have any answers for. But it is interesting. It is interesting in that, like, that's a choice that you have to make from a very young age. And being a child and being told, like, this is your helmet, you have to keep it on, and don't ever take it off when other people are around and can see you. Like, that's a big deal for a kid. I guess it, it just shows dedication to the way, and the dedication to the creed of Mandalorian-ness.
Mm-hmm. I also wonder if maybe the way they're going to explain it, because I hope they get more into it, is I wonder if it's related to the Purge. And like, they've been saying recently that Mandalorians are being hunted and that Mandalorians are very unsafe. And I wonder if there's an idea of, well, but no, that doesn't make any sense, because it's like if people know your real face, then they could find you based on your real face, but you never show it to anyone, so who cares?
The helmet is more indicative of being a Mandalorian than your face.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I got nothing. But fans, if you have more thoughts on this, I'd love to hear it. Because it's certainly it was something else I found very striking about this episode was, him really being confronted with this chance, but being like, no, not taking off my... Because I think, isn't this the episode... I saw it a couple weeks ago, and we had to keep changing recording schedule because of craziness in my life. But wasn't this the episode where... No, it's later that he gets hurt and might have to take it off. But I think
it's the last episode.
I think there's a moment where she wants to feed him, but he won't eat in front of her because he has to take the helmet off. Is that correct?
There is that. She brings him food, and she asks him, "When's the last time you took that off?" And he says, "Yesterday." She said in front of somebody else, and he's like, "Oh yeah, not since I was a kid." And then there's at the end of the episode, she grabs the helmet and starts to take it off, and he grabs her hands and is like, "I can't. This is the way."
Right.
He does, though, after she leaves, when she leaves the food with him, he does take the helmet off and eat.
Right, and we the audience get to see his face.
Not in this episode.
Oh no, that's a later episode. Okay, that's right. Thank you.
He leaves it. He leaves the helmet on the windowsill with the giant open window, and the kids are only 15 feet away, but nobody can see him. Nobody can see his face.
That's right.
It's a bit of a it felt kind of silly that it's okay if they're right out there, but if any one of those people out there looks in the window, you're screwed, man.
It might be one of those laws of I did what I could to avoid it. It's not my I didn't choose to let it happen, or something like that. But it does. I mean, I have to imagine that it's a sort of thing of no one but your family can see your face or something, because family dinners are kind of hard if mom and dad can't take off the helmets in front of each other and the kids,
All right, guys, everything is blended. We're having smoothies for every meal. I've got this specially made straw that goes under your helmet.
Letting alone the creation of kids has to be a somewhat odd experience that we don't need to get too into.
Hey, you want to bang helmets?
There you go. Romance in the Mandalorian world.
Yep. Hey, I'd like to clank her helmet. What?
Oh, God. Okay, we're reeling you back in now.
Yep.
Reeling you back in.
Getting way out there.
We're stuck in our houses for a long time. It's been a thing. The big battle scene. I often think kind of set piece things like this can get kind of silly, but I kind of loved it. What about you?
I like that it showed that there's something that they can both of these badasses fear, and ATST is something to contend with. I mean, they know how to contend with it, and the best way to do anything about it is to get the hell out,
Yeah.
And they gave them that option. They said, you guys got to go. That's the best thing to do is to leave. And then they were like, no, this is our home, and these pawns were seeded by our ancestors. Like, cool, take the fish, go somewhere else.
Yeah.
And then they have to go and do their thing in the orc camp, obviously. And yes, I'm going to call them orcs because they look exactly like orcs, and they function
really
exactly
were space
like
orcs.
orcs. They were space orcs. Come on. But the ATST being there was, I feel like it was found hardware. We found the thing. This is our ticket. This is our ticket to getting everything. And our heroes had to do something about it, and it's something that's scary. We saw these in Return of the Jedi, and it was a big deal to have to deal with these.
Yeah.
And we don't have any Ewoks around, so.
Although interesting that their solution to it was kind of Ewokian, and that it's a trap. Yeah, it's a trap, and it's kind of using nature and using kind of primitive fighting methods against the big hulking machine. And it's I don't know if you can go to that well too many more times, but I certainly thought it was done very well here. I liked at first because I don't know if you figured it out, but the whole time they were digging the ditch, I had no idea what was going on, and why they were so eager for it to step into the water. Then when it finally did, I was like, oh, now I get it. Okay.
Yeah, it's a bungee pit.
Yeah,
sort of.
It definitely had a sort of the middle schoolers all get together to figure out what to do with the high school bully kind of feel to it.
Yeah, let's tie all of our shoestrings together, and when he's walking down the hall, we'll, yank it up and trip him. And then we'll jump on his head. That sort of thing is that's kind of what happened here.
Yeah, just without the shooting him with blasters and blowing him up.
You didn't do that to the bullies in your school?
Nah, no. Ours was a very different kind of place.
Yeah.
Very
schools
weird
in Alabama are way crazy.
Yeah, New York City, I think, is a little bit different. We probably went to very, very different experiences. But yeah, so, and then I like the last moment of, and again, it felt very much like what you'd expect, but, because I will say, I never bought that the Mandalorian was going to settle down, but for a minute, I did buy that, maybe he was going to leave the child there. I thought maybe you were going to have, 1 or 2 episodes of him off by himself trying to deal with stuff, and then he realizes that there's trouble back home and he's going to go rescue the child. But I like that they kind of made me believe it. And then the bounty hunter shows up and he's like, nope, can't do this. I got to take the child with me.
Yep, out of here. I for a moment I was thinking that he would leave him, but that there would be there's obviously something that has to happen later in the series where he leaves the kid, somebody comes up and grabs the kid from them and then sends him a message thanks for leaving the package in such an easily, non-defensible area. Yeah. And I'm twirl my mustache and get out of here. And then he has to rally and show up and do what he does. But I kind of appreciate that they didn't do that. They didn't allow the mustache twirly villain to be villainous.
Right. Yeah, and it was just another guild person, but it makes sense. The guild people would be tracking him, and it's
those fobs don't go away. All of them still have those fobs.
Yeah. And there's something interesting to me about it's this big, huge galaxy, but still people can track you, people can chase you. And what do you have to do for that? So
it's not so big a galaxy after all.
Exactly. So with that, I think that's about all we can say about this episode before going into a spoiler section. So for anyone who is watching along with us and hasn't seen the rest of the show, please kind of step out in a second, check out all the things on our show notes about how to learn more about this podcast and other podcasts of the Stranded Network, as well as how to contact us. And for everyone else, spoiler warning in 3, 2, 1.
Cara Dune's Bay. It's not a
Cara
spoiler.
Dune's Bay.
You knew what I was going to say.
Yeah. And I feel there's not too, in terms of what this episode tells us more once we know more of the show. I feel certainly knowing that Cara Dune comes back is great and gives what we see of her character kind of another dimension, because it's nice to know that that part of the world is going to keep getting fleshed out. But as you said, I don't think any of the later episodes put any of this episode more into context anyway, do they?
No, not really at all. I mean, we get to learn a bit more about Cara Dune just as a character and what those stripes on her arm mean, but that's about it.
Right.
I mean, the series as a whole, I would say that it doesn't really benefit from this episode at all, but it doesn't detract from it either. There's no point in not having this episode other than, you would lose the intro of Cara Dune, but it could have just been anybody that he had met before that he rallies with in episodes 7 and 8.
Right. There's one of my I think it's in the intro to The Stand. Stephen King writes an intro to one of his books where he basically takes a fairy tale. I think it's Goldilocks and the Three Bears, and he tells it 2 different ways. And one of the ways he tells it, he tells you every plot point, but he basically doesn't use any adjectives. He strips away all of the details that make the story a fascinating story, even though they don't actually add to the plot in any way. And yeah, I think that's what this episode is. This episode doesn't tell us more about the overall story, but it makes me so much more interested in the world in which the story takes place.
The series is a noun. This episode is an adjective.
Yeah, I think it's a really good way to put it.
Yep. I mean, I approve.
Yeah.
I approve. And having her come back to be a badass, and the fact that she, whenever she's told like, hey, you might want to cover up your stripes, she's like, nah. She's like, nah, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
I love it. I love that she's just like so proud of what she did, but not where it's gone, Like
Right.
she's proud of having been a shock trooper, but she's not necessarily proud of where the Republic ended up. And she doesn't want to hide those stripes. But then they do talk about in, I think it's episode 7, where Werner the client, Werner Herzog, it's so hard to say his name properly. When he sees her, he talks about how, they were just cut down by, or no, it might have been Giancarlo Esposito that did it, who talked about how her and her friends and everybody that she was in, in the Republic or in the Resistance army with, they were cut down and out of the sky with, this weapon that they brought up. And, to have her react to that and kind of dig in just a little bit more and dig in just a little bit more with her backstory, with what she's been through. Like, I love that they fleshed that out a little bit more and a little bit more.
Yeah. It definitely makes me, it makes me so much more curious about because I don't think we ever heard shock troopers mentioned in any of the Republic stories so far.
No, it's got such a negative connotation to it.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds, because, again, it's that, the rebellion, we're all supposed to be, happy-go-lucky warriors, and now thinking about, no, we had elite troops who did, they did the hard things they had to do behind enemy lines. It just, there's a part, I always think a lot about, what is all of the, further media we're going to get. And I would love to have because we get more Cara Dune, but I would love to get a movie or a short episode TV, a short run miniseries that was just a gritty war movie about this group of shock troopers during the war against the Empire.
Oh man, that would be so great.
Yeah.
Star Wars Battlefront, the first one, original on Xbox, Battlefront 2 is the one that I played. That goes through, it follows the story of the 501st, and I would love to see something like that, but for her troop and her unit. Yeah,
that could be really good, especially because it's that's when everyone shifted away from clone warriors to actual real people warriors, and I'd be very that alone just brings up so many questions about you form battle plans and technology around clones, and now you're switching to real, not that clones aren't real people, but what does that switch do? And
clones are people too.
They are. That's a big topic in the other half of the show about the Clone Wars. So,
yep.
All right. Any last thoughts before you wrap up?
Not really. I mean, it's a fun, refreshing little breather before getting into the real big stuff. In later episodes, I like it.
Yeah, it's kind of a nice end. It being episode 4, it's kind of a nice end of the first half. So, fans, what are your thoughts? Tell us what you think. Especially, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Mandalorian helmet and all the lore there, and why you think they have to keep the helmet on. But also just your thoughts on any parts of this episode, things we got right, things we got wrong. You can find us on Twitter, on Facebook, or by email. All the information's in the show notes. And as I mentioned, we have a number of other great podcasts. I run a podcast called Superhero Ethics, and I'm also on the Orville Universe podcast for the TV show The Orville. Jeff is also on the Marvel Cinematic Universe and has just launched Bingers Assemble. Jeff, you want to talk about that for a moment?
Yeah, Bingers Assemble is the podcast where we rewatch movies so you don't have to. It's
and it includes some X-Men movies that I really don't want to watch.
yeah, it's just really quick discussion and overview of plots of previous movies that have a sequel coming up in the coming weeks. We started with the X-Men just to kind of get our MCU and Marvel roots out there, and kind of bring those people with that launch. And we started with the X-Men stuff, and from there we'll be doing some Daniel Craig James Bond for No Time for Pi later this year.
Nice.
And Furious 9, I think it is coming out. Then Matt's going to be doing stuff with a co-host there. And the big thing with this is that it's kind of just a recap and light discussion, but it's shifting the co-hosts or shifting the hosts. So it's, if it's not my fandom, well, let's bring somebody else in who is a part of that fandom, who does love those movies. So it's usually always joyful. I can't really say that about the Apocalypse episode that we're going to talk about.
There's a certain joy in ripping apart a piece of bad media.
Yeah.
But I'm really excited about it, both as a fan and I've spoken to Matt a little bit. I'll probably be a host for a couple things, or at least a guest. But I know, to me, there's something great about watching everything before a sequel comes out. Starting with maybe movie 4, every time a new Harry Potter movie would come out, I would watch all the ones before it, and like with Lord of the Rings movies, I would always watch the 1 or the 2 before it. And I certainly did that with a lot of the Star Wars movies. But we're getting to a point, like, if I said I was going to, like, I rewatched all the Avengers movies before Endgame. But, like, if I did that for every Marvel movie, I'd go insane. Let alone for, we have so many sequels and so many things coming out. But I hate to go to a movie and realize, like, there was some great Easter egg that I totally missed. And so I love this because I feel like listening to you guys is entertaining, but it also means that when I go into the new X-Men movie, I'm going to know, like, be up to date and be like, I'm not going to forget the big details. So, yeah, it's a great podcast. I definitely suggest people check it out. Bingers Assemble. You can find that on the Stranded Panda Network, as well as all the other things we just talked about. So, yeah, please check some of those out. Thank you guys again so much for being a fan. Please leave us a review. We're still kind of getting our feet under the ground for this podcast. Please leave a review for us on iTunes or somewhere else. Tell people why you love the podcast. Tell people why you listen. Share it with your friends. Help us get the listener numbers up. It's a great way for us to kind of build the community, build the network, and bring so much more Star Wars content to you guys. So on behalf of myself and Jeff, as well as Riki and Sarah, my other co-hosts, please keep tuning in. Have a great day.
I've spoken.
Yes, you have.